So I'm about to start an hour of flogging, and I got to tell you, I'd rather stick my dick in a blender.
I used to hear a simple song. That was until you came along. Now in its place is something new. I hear it when I look at you.
So, last week I did a test on the indoor trainer, as many of my channel supporters will know. Now that test enabled me to get my functional threshold power, my FTP, and that test was the all-new Half Monty, which is on the Sufferfest indoor training app, and is a test that was established by a highly regarded coach of pro cyclists and world champions, Neil Henderson. Now the Half Monty is considered to be a more comprehensive and scientific variation of the traditional ramp test, which you may have previously seen on Trainer Road and Zwift. Now the idea of the test once completed is you get a few numbers which enable you to train a lot smarter. One of those numbers is obviously your functional threshold power, which is essentially the amount of power or watts you should be able to hold on a bike for roughly an hour, and my score was 350 watts. So I wondered, could I actually hold 350 watts for a full hour? Now it should be noted that when you're at threshold, your lactate threshold, you start transitioning energy systems and you start tapping more into the energy that's stored directly in your muscles, and the byproduct is lactate, which is essentially trying to shut down your muscles. And we'll talk more about that shortly, but you might be asking yourself now, why would I actually do this to myself? Particularly with low motivation levels right now. That is, go outside and ride as hard as I can for 1 hour, of course solo and in a safe and quiet environment. Now, a couple of things prompted me to do this to myself. Number one, I've done different versions of the FTP test in the past, so the 20-minute test, the 2x8-minute test, the ramp test, etc. But I've never done the full balls out 1 hour test. You see, most people never do it, even though it's arguably and should be the benchmark to find out your FTP. And there are two big reasons why they never do it. Number one, external to indoor trainers, there may actually not be an environment for them to ride consistently. And number two, and this is probably the main one, is riding for an hour balls out is a horrible thought. I even asked my wife, who also is a cyclist, about this topic. If your tri coach prescribed you to do a 1 hour all out effort on the bike, to get a number, your functional threshold power, what would you say?
1 hour.
1 hour all out.
I'd hot fire him and get a new coach.
So there was fascination, and then there was a couple of comments I received underneath the YouTube video I made about the Half Monty, about why I didn't even include the full hour as a common FTP testing protocol. Even Neil chimed in himself to outline why it's not that common at all. So still carrying some conditioning from my most disappointing road race of all time, the Melbourne to Warrnambool, and not having many carrots out there to keep me motivated at this point in time, I thought maybe now was a great time to give this 1 hour balls out effort a crack. Now for this test, I needed a bike, and my bike is the BMC Teammachine SLR01. I could not think of a better road bike to do this test on because the way it absorbs the road, it is easily the most comfortable all-round race bike that I have ever ridden. I also needed a power meter, so I've got a Quarq power meter right here. It's pretty much brand new. I think it's about 2 months old, fully calibrated before the test as well, and transmitting from my power meter, transmitting power, of course, and cadence to my bike computer, which sits up there. I also had a heart rate monitor on, and you'll see a whole bunch of other data fields on the screen, which I pretty much had access to while I did the test, to ensure that I could really have that carrot of 350 watts to see if I could achieve that during this full hour. Now, I did have issues with this thing for the first time ever in 4 years before I got the test started. I'm having massive issues with this thing, unpairing, disconnecting, only showing 3 fields. That's Murphy's Law for you, but I got it sorted, and the last thing I needed was a place to do this 1 hour test, which we'll go to now. So here we are at the bottom of Gindia Drive, a magnificent closed road here on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. The three main aspects of this 1 hour test that I'm going to share with you today are number one, what the course actually looked like. Number two, my plan for the 1 hour flogging, including how I use my available numbers pre-test in a favourable manner. And number three, what actually happened, including how the carrot of 350 watts changed to something else during the 1 hour. Now, before we get into this, as a road cycling coach, I just want to point out that FTP and this test today is only one piece of the pie when it comes to road cycling performance. I know many people out there get caught up in the numbers, neglecting basic bike handling skills and the art of general bunch riding and racing. So for the full picture, don't forget that I have a free ebook for road cyclists looking to go next level, which I'll link to below. So on the screen here, you can see from left to right, we have the course, which we'll discuss very shortly, heart rate, cadence, speed, power, average 30-second power, gradient, and the time of day. Note for anyone out there using Garmin Verb, which is what I use for the screen overlays, see how I turn the computer on, that's my bike computer, at the yellow bollards. So a landmark for me to accurately sync the data. For the data nerds out there, the goal, as you know, is 350 watts today. That's 350 watt average. And as I've stacked on a few kilos, thanks to the lockdown and having too many of these, the watts per kilo target for FTP is 4.4 watts. So the course. This ride is on Strava, which I'll link to below, but the two big questions I needed to ask myself for this 1 hour test were as follows. Number one, do I have a quiet and safe environment to complete this test? And number two, will I be able to keep pressure on the crank for the full 1 hour without much interruption? So essentially, no traffic lights, no hairy intersections, nor roads that produce a lot of traffic. So what we actually have here to start this test is a closed road. It's a short hill climb that goes for 2.5 kilometers or 6 minutes. The average gradient is 4%, and it's really an ideal place for me to get this test going. While I personally would not agree with facilitating a complete FTP test up a hill because of the favour it can provide, please keep in mind that this is only for 6 minutes of a full hour, and I have many challenges to contend with when I hit the circuit component. For example, when I hit the circuit, I'll be faced with 10 intersections all up, undulating terrain, which makes it very difficult to get any type of rhythm, and I do have to contend with a little bit of traffic. However, the roads external to one you'll see shortly are super quiet. So now you can see I'm at the top of the Gindia closed road climb. I have to hook a right, and then I'm veering into a slip lane, which is a highly useful piece of road for this section of the circuit, as I'm about to enter out onto the only section of this course which has a little bit of traffic. However, as I'm in the slip lane, I can gauge any traffic coming before I enter onto the main part of the road. And while there are a few cars on this road, I'm only on it for a couple of kilometers, and there is, of course, a bike lane you can see here. So, the plan. I had three big assets at my disposal. Number one, I was very familiar with the course. If you've watched my videos before, or if you're a member of my online road cycling course called the Up-Level Road Cycling Course, you will have seen me training on this circuit many a times. And being familiar with the course should be an asset for anyone and everyone out there that is looking to attempt this type of test themselves. Number two, I have the carrot of 350 watts to achieve with an average power reading on my bike computer throughout the test. So I knew where I was at any given point in time in reference to target wattage. Number three, as part of the Half Monty test, you also get your lactate threshold heart rate zone. So I know that around 165 to 170 beats is going to be a good target range from a heart rate perspective. As soon as I'm pushing, say, 3 to 5 beats beyond 168, I know it's a ticket to further lactate production, and my legs are going to be shutting down even further. So with those three assets in mind, my plan was to land at the top of the closed road with an average of around 380 watts, and then ride lap one at around an average of 340 watts. lap 2 at around an average of 350 watts, and then the final full lap, lap 3, at around an average of 360 watts. Maybe I was dreaming a little bit, and then finish off as hard as I could with what was only going to be a short-lived lap 4 to achieve the full 1 hour. So what ended up actually happening? Typically when riding at threshold like this, I always find the first 15 to 20 minutes the most difficult. Finding that rhythm and telling your legs to shut up and deal with the high levels of lactate takes some time. But today, while things hurt, I didn't actually experience that challenge. I was able to establish a rhythm almost immediately, getting to the top of Gindia, so the closed road, at around an average of 390 watts, and then to the end of lap 1 with an average of 358 watts, and then to the end of the second lap with an average of 357 watts. So going into the last full lap, all I needed was 3 watts to crack 360. So that became the new target. Going into the third lap, I had roughly 18 minutes to go, but I almost cocked things up and potentially could have even blown the original 350 target. As discussed, you're really walking a fine line when you're riding at threshold. If that line goes too far the wrong way, you can blow up. On this section of road, on the third lap, I'm pushing 380 to 400 watts, and my heart rate starts going north of 170 beats. Essentially, I'm going into my VO2 max zone. And when you do this, lactate production becomes more pronounced and your legs start shutting down at a much faster rate. And certainly, after what was really only a short period pushing at this level, given the already lactate-induced legs, I really struggled to re-establish a good rhythm when I turned corner 2, lap 3, that's into Darth Henderson Road, which actually started to feel more like Darth Vader Road. The dark side of lactate was coming to get me. Luckily though, in training, I focus on both high cadence and low cadence drills, which essentially means I have conditioned both the cardiovascular system and the musculoskeletal system, 2 systems I could leverage to re-establish a rhythm, which luckily I was able to do. I then waited until the final 2 minutes before lifting the pressure again and managed to finish all balls out just before getting to that tricky intersection, thank goodness. Now, given the levels of fatigue, I actually hit the wrong button on the Wahoo bike computer when I finished the effort, and I lost a few seconds. So the Wahoo read 361 watt average, but today's plan, my training software, took the full hour at 363 watts. Either way, I cracked the 360 mark, which I was pleased about, but perhaps more so now, pleased that the test was finally over. Comparing these numbers to the Half Monty, which is a much, much easier test, my FTP with the Half Monty was 350 watts. For the full hour, it was 363 watts. And my lactate threshold heart rate with the Half Monty was 168 beats versus 170 for the full hour test. So we're well within a 5% accuracy range on both counts using a much more practical test. So it begs the question, is the 1 hour test really needed? I don't think so. While I'm glad I did try this test and I can now tick the box, I think I'll stick with the Half Monty in the future. Hey, if you enjoyed the video today, please don't forget to subscribe below if you already haven't, and hit the bell notification to ensure you get notified of my videos, and I'll catch you all in the next video.
Perfection is so quick to bore. You are more beautiful by far.